Good evening and welcome to this week's Skwawk Talk on Socialist Tally. Pleased to welcome you tonight, and I'm delighted to welcome three very special guests. We had on yesterday evening's programme in a Scouse flavour with Pint and Politics visiting Liverpool virtually, and we're continuing that flavour tonight with two Scouse legends and one East Midlands legend who happens to be a Liverpool supporter. And for anybody who's not sure, because of my accent, I am an adopted Scouser, and they've been very kind in allowing me to come and live in their brilliant city. So we have Ian Byrne MP, who has been one of the stars of the latest intake of Labour MPs. We have Alan Gordon, who runs a South Liverpool institution, the Bread Shop Bakery, which has been there, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, since 1958, and is very well known in the South Liverpool area. And Brent Poland, who is a teacher from the East Midlands and a union rep, but is an LFC fan. And everybody's very happy after yesterday's result with Liverpool enjoying a very nice 3-1 win. Good evening, fellas.
Evening.
I'll go over to you, Ian, if I can first, because one of the things that's still been very high in the media and social media agenda has been your Right to Food campaign and the problems with kids still not getting properly fed, etc. Tell us a bit about what's going on with that.
Good to be on here. It's a nice day, and as you said, after yesterday's fabulous result, we're all extremely happy Liverpool fans. But just on the Right to Food, everything around it, to be honest. So since the motion went through council last week and Liverpool declared itself a Right to Food city, the interest has been phenomenal, to be honest. It really has, from Cornwall to Newcastle, activists in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, the whole of the UK really has contacted the office and asked how they can actually advance that to their areas and their communities and through their councils. So it took us a bit by surprise, to be honest. Fan supporting food banks and ourselves, and our office has been inundated, and brilliant to see. Brilliant to see it catch fire. And I think a wonderful example of what happened and how it has caught fire is just over the weekend on Friday, we had the Bishop of Liverpool, Paul Bayes, who's a fantastic advocate of fighting poverty, and we've done lots with Paul. We had Jeremy Corbyn and we had Kenny Dalglish all come out and talk about the Right to Food. So within 2 days, we've gone from, I think it was about 26,000 on the petition, the Transport and Food Bank's petition, to just over 40,000. And that's just, as I said, it's just like concentrating on Liverpool, to be honest. That's what's happening, but now we're seeing the spread. So what we're hoping is over the next month, 2 months, we'll have council motions going through Newcastle, Birmingham, Preston, to name but a few, Manchester, Liverpool City region, the Wirral. Spoke to both Steve Rodham and Andy Burnham on the matter, and there's lots and lots of interest. And as I've been on here before and explained, Steve, there's a real opportunity with the National Food Strategy to crank up this pressure and make Henry Dimble being the government aware that something's got to change. We need systemic change. 11 million people in food poverty cannot carry on, and you say it's only getting worse. Did you see the photos? I'm sure the viewers did, of the students in London, lines, thousands of them queuing, it's across every part of society now. So something's got to be done, and we feel as though this is an opportunity. And as I said, it has caught public interest. It is moving rapidly throughout the country. And my message, I'm sure we'll come on to that, but if anybody is a councillor watching this, if anybody is an activist, please email me. There's a toolkit available, which has got the motion, letters, the pledge, which is getting signed throughout Liverpool as Liverpool City now. So it's all there. It's ready to go, and ready to give it out and let people empower their communities and declare their own communities a right to food.
That's brilliant. In terms of the petition, you said you've got more than 40,000 now, is that right?
Yeah, just over 40,000.
There's a magic number on that though, isn't there? So what's the magic number and what happens if we reach it?
So if you reach 100,000 and it's a fan supporting food banks petition, then it'll be debated in the House of Commons, and that's, again, it's just putting it on the front foot. It's, you know, what Marcus has done at the moment. Petitions aren't being debated because of the COVID restrictions, but it will be debated once we get back to some sort of normality. And it's all about educating people, making people aware of the National Food Strategy, how important that is to this country, and how we can influence what goes in it. And that's the aim, Steve. It's a simple aim. And I think the simplicity of the motion is probably why it is going throughout the country, because all it's doing is asking the council's leaders to actually write to Henry Dimbleby and ask them to include it in the National Food Strategy. So, you know, there's no monetary strings attached. You know, in times where we are asking councils, it's the first step in getting it into legislation, and that's what we're asking people to do. So I think that's where it's catching fire. But if you haven't signed a petition, please, you're watching this, sign it, log on and sign it.
And in terms of, I mean, right to food, some people might not be 100% sure what that would entail. What difference would it make if we had a right to food enshrined in legislation in this country?
It's accountability, Steve. It's accountability from a government perspective. And, you know, we get asked this question quite often, and think a really good example of if the right to food was in legislation would be the ability to challenge the 5-week wait for universal credit. And in fact, if that was actually mooted by a government, it probably wouldn't have been enacted. It wouldn't have been on the statute book, because it would have been they wouldn't have been able to do, because it would have been unlawful. So basically, that's what it's doing. It's systemic change. You know, there's many people here, and we may talk about it, that do wonderful work in the communities, pantries, food banks across the country, keeping people afloat. But it's not. You know, this shouldn't be the job of volunteers. You know, this is a systemic failing by government, and it needs fixing. That's where we are. That's where we're coming from, and that's it. And that's what the ask is.
Couldn't agree more with that, really. Alan, let me bring you in. I'll give you a quick intro. So Alan is the guy who runs the Bread Shop Bakery, which is a South Liverpool, very well-known institution on one of the main roads in and out of the city centre from the south. And Alan, you've been also involved with the fan supporting food banks and the whole food banks project there. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing as well with it.
The last bit that Ian's just said there was really striking, that he said, you know, it's a failure of government. The business that I work in now has been there since 1958. My grandfather and my father, and in no time in them period of history has it been to the point now where there is food banks, there is drop-off centres. You know, it's been a new thing. Through the generations of having the shop, that this is a new thing, and what Ian's there, the last point he's just said there, that it is a massive failing of the government, and he's correct on it. So
you've been showing as well how the local businesses can kind of help with the community effort on that, because when you go in your shop, you've got a box on the till for anybody to put a monetary donation in if they want to, and you also got baskets around to collect food for the local food banks as well.
Yeah, we run a pay it forward scheme. So basically, a lot of the people want to help but just don't know how to. So they can donate some money into a tub, as you say, on the counter, and that then is distributed into the homeless or the most vulnerable in the community. We also have a bin outside. Again, if anyone wants to donate, they can drop their items in there, and that again gets passed on to various organisations or ourselves, distributed to local vulnerable people. And, you know, just to repeat myself again, since 1958, that shop has been open, but never at the state where we're at this moment.
And you've even had people, as I've seen on a couple of occasions going past, where people have been that desperate, some of them have been coming and trying to nick food out of the food bank baskets outside as well.
Yeah.
Sorry,
can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry. There was an incident about a year ago that there was a young gentleman was stealing food outside. Basically, he ran up the street. I went after him in my car and just spoke to him and said, "Look, you know, do you generally need food?" And he was like, "Yeah." So we took him back to the shop and basically helped him out, give him a couple of bags of food, and then he left. You know, again, if anyone needs anything or needs help, they're more than welcome to come and see me personally, and we can help you with it. Also, as you say, there's a pot of money that people leave coins sometimes on the top, and we've had people taking it from there as well. So it is a difficult situation we're in at the moment. But, obviously we are all sticking together. The local community is great, and obviously just trying to find a solution for it, because it's not a good way.
Yes. Brent, you're a teacher. You've seen, I think we've touched on this in the previous program, but you've seen kids coming into school and hungry, and teachers giving, paying out of their own money to buy food for kids so they can concentrate well enough to study. Tell us a bit about what you are seeing at the moment. And this was obviously schools aren't fully open right now, but throughout the lockdown and the pandemic so far.
Yeah, I've had so many experiences where we have the working poor, we call them, and we did a lot of studies on this even in our educational area, because we've got quite a mixed bag of students coming from all different areas, ex-mining areas, but we have hidden poverty, that real housing estate hidden poverty, where people are on the edge of where they get benefits and they're working 2 and 3 jobs, any jobs they can get, which has actually made them also COVID insecure, because they're the type of people who've been out doing those gig economy jobs, and their children, it's not their fault, their children are in institutional poverty because they can never activate some of the benefits, and then they're caught with this poverty trap of being forced to go to work. And then, the child in some ways is looking after themselves, or the older siblings are looking after them. But we have had instances where colleagues of mine rung me up, I'm the union rep, and they said, look, I've just done a thing I don't know if I should have done. Am I going to get into trouble? I'm like, okay, what's happened? So, I got a phone call from one of the parents saying, we're starting. And a mother of 3 herself, she ran out with, some groceries, handed them over, and thought, oh my gosh, have I done wrong here? Am I in trouble for this? And what did I say to my colleagues is, hey, you've done what any other person would do. And that's the type of stuff that was happening during the first lockdown. What really shocked me was the ad hoc nature of where our local area, our local MP, our local Conservative MP was completely oblivious, and so were the local council, who were again Conservative. And they used the voucher scheme from this company called Eden Red. And it turns out that when we investigated Eden Red, we found out that the government doesn't know they made a profit. And that was the precursor to the latest scandal. And that was the one in October half term, when our local MP wrote a letter to all the schools in Derbyshire, basically saying, to put down why she didn't vote for free school meals, because she said that was a Labour stunt. And then she addressed it by saying there's no child poverty, because the 81 schools in Derbyshire, 81 secondary schools in Derbyshire, never got back to them about whether they wanted free school boxes. So guess what? The 81 schools in Derbyshire didn't know to get back to them about that. So the question then is, where did those free school boxes go? Where down the system did it go? And that's my problem. My problem is that I've got a development economics background. I've been a teacher for 17 years in a parallel universe. I'm over in Africa doing aid work. That's where my background was originally. And I know one thing about, helping people in poverty. You need to help them up out of poverty, but it's the same as the thing in 1984 in Africa. We're caught in a kind of trap of feeding people and then constantly, and we are not getting them out of this institutional trap. The same as education funding is cut. I'm tired of seeing the same cycle that's getting bigger and bigger. So for me, the whole food poverty is a sticking plaster over the gaping wound, and the gaping wound is the gap between the rich and the poor just gets bigger and bigger, and of which COVID is just, for me, it's just highlighting what gaps are there and accentuating them. But all we're really doing, and it's brilliant work, and it's absolutely, it's like the relief column. We're like dropping in all this work that the communities are doing. It's a bit like the aid relief convoy coming in, the Blue Peter appeal, isn't it? It's almost like we're sending in a relief supply for people and keeping them going. But that doesn't solve the long-term issue. And the long-term issue is the gap between the rich and the poor, and the institutional poverty in schools. And we are trying our best. I was on the radio earlier on with LBC, and they said, would you want the vaccine? I would happily give up the vaccine for better classrooms, better funding, and better future for my children. I am tired of beg, stealing, and borrowing. Teachers are sending resources. We've got kids who have no paper at home. The NEU and the Mirror have done some good work recently, where they put £1 million up and says, we've got kids at home, and they're sending a photograph of their work to me. And it's on a phone and blurry. And it's like fag packet. I've had kids send their work on the back of toilet paper because they've got no resources at home. So that's when people turn around and don't recognize the causes of poverty. And what it also does is it knocks the confidence out of children. I'm working class myself, proud. And I grew up in poverty. I grew up in the Troubles, and I grew up with my father's a plasterer, mum's a housewife. So I know about poverty, but the difference was my parents were driven and motivated to get me to school. I got to uni for free. The generation of children I'm teaching here in England, the gap's just getting bigger. Their outcomes are getting longer. And COVID again is just going to do that. And we're going to have cyclical poverty that needs to be broken. So, I mean, we addressed the short-term issue, but I'm 17 years in teaching, thinking to myself, the gap's getting bigger. And unless we look at the institutional side of it and education as a whole, then we're just constantly going to be caught in this trap, and communities are going to be caught in this trap. And what will happen, sadly, is after a couple of years of this, people will sort of go poverty, and they'll get that fatigue, won't they? They'll get that fatigue of almost, how do I say it? That poverty fatigue. There's a name for that, isn't it? What do they call that? Compassion fatigue, don't they?
Yes.
A little bit of that in the media, where some people are like, oh, it's the kid's fault. And you think there are people out there condemning the child for their accident of birth when they have no choice over where they've been born. The same as myself. And they're blaming the children for the parents' problem, but they don't understand that these parents are out there doing their best. A lot of judgmental people out there, sadly. And that's been heartbreaking as well, trying to combat that idea, you know, and I know Marcus Rashford's come into a lot of criticism for it, because I don't understand why people would criticize the guy. Much as I'm a Liverpool supporter, the guy's a god at the moment, and I'm not ashamed to admit that.
Yeah.
So,
and we'll come back on the kind of public education and the media side of it in a little bit, because that'll link back in. But I mean, Ian, you represent a constituency on the east of the city that has quite a spread, I think, of you know, between wealthy and very poor people within the boundaries. What are you hearing back from people there and from the schools in that area?
Yeah, that was a great contribution by Brent there. Just before I go on to that, you know, Alan's never going to ask for kudos. He's never going to ask for the spotlight. And, you know, what he's done, that bakery, been working alongside us for 5 years since the inception of Fan Support and Food Banks, never ever wanted any sort of attention. He's been behind there supplying every effort that we've been doing. And, you know, that bakery has been absolutely outstanding. So when you claim it for the South, Steve, I'm always going to rally back and say he does lots and lots and lots across the city. So, you know, that... You know, we see many businesses getting rightly lambasted, you know, for what they've actually done during COVID, you know, and try to take advantage to enhance profits. And there's a long list of them. But what Alan's been doing in that bakery is phenomenal. And
let's park the schools issue for a few minutes then, and we'll just talk briefly about that, because, you know, I mean, I know Alan, you know, a little bit just from going past the shop, but. You know, I know that there's a number of community initiatives he's been getting involved in.
Absolutely.
In terms of showing what businesses, particularly small businesses, can do. But obviously, I think we want to hear from him as well how people can support their local businesses that are managing to, you know, plough on and just about hang in there during the lockdown, etc. But Alan, you've got a thing going on with the litter picking in the local parks, and you're also one of the first members of the Don't Buy the Sun campaign. Which is, you know, which I think links into the whole idea of education and media coverage, etc. But we'll cover that in a minute. Tell us first about what you're doing with the parks and with the other stuff you've got going on in the local area to try to improve.
Okay, can I just mention one thing there that Ian said about the small shops there? We've reduced the price of the essential items in the shop in January and February. We noticed November, December, it was getting tight for people. They weren't having big Christmas presents. They weren't expecting things. So as a business there, we did reduce the price of the bread and the milk to try and basically help, if that's a way, you know, reduce our profit on the key items, that milk for £1, bread for £1, the everyday items. So that was one thing we did. Concerning the local area and the rubbish, there has been an influx of people in the local parks in South Liverpool. Obviously lockdown, people are going out, they're not working, they're exercising more. So I think it's, you know, possibly 4 times the amount of people are using the parks that used to, which has then caused a higher influx of rubbish and car parking space. Other problems have arisen because of that. We did an initiative basically to try and keep the area, you know, clean, and it was great because we basically said, you know, if you're going to go and pick a bag of rubbish up in the local area in the parks, bring it to the shop and we'll give you ice creams or slush or hot chocolates or whatever you want, basically. And that sort of educated a lot of mums and dads, to be honest, because the children do learn about the environment and litter in schools, and probably they're better than any of us at looking after the local area. So we had families picking rubbish up, bringing it to the shop, and obviously just highlighting the fact that, and it worked. It really did help. The way rubbish does move, I have big chain franchises a mile away from me, and their rubbish ends up outside my shop. So it hasn't blown there. It's people have maybe come in cars, open the car door, put it at the side of the car door, at something else. So actually the analysation of rubbish and the education of rubbish has actually helped the area, basically. So if in any way I could help with that, that was great, because it has helped, yeah.
You have a thing on as well where if people pick up litter, is that still going?
Yeah, it's obviously they pick up litter, bring it to the shop. You know, they can have a hot chocolate, a coffee or something, ice cream, whatever, as a little reward. Well, an incentive, maybe a reward or whatever else to keep. It can't be a reward, but you know, I think just all together it helps. Most people have come with litter and said they don't want a coffee, and I'm like, well, you're getting one anyway. You like it or not, you know. But yeah, no, it's been great, and it's really helped. And if other shops in other areas could possibly do the same, I think it might just sort of have a little bit of a snowball effect, really, especially the ones by parks. Yeah.
And you mentioned your pay it forward scheme. How does that work?
Well, basically, if people have, some people want to help but don't really know how to help. So we basically have people say, okay, can I put £1 in there? They can. That money will increase. Sometimes we'll take food bags ourselves into the city and give them out to the homeless. Other times, other people will do that. And other times, the money's gone to different charities, organisations in the area where they can distribute it, because we can't distribute it all ourselves. So it's just a scheme that, you know, it's something that we can do, you know, and people can help with.
Brilliant, well done. And the other thing, you know, I think one of the key reasons why the government's able to get away with a lot of it, what it gets away with, is the support they get from the media and the work that the media, so-called mainstream media, do to you know, cover their backsides and make excuses for what they do, or make the arguments for them, etc. One of the things I love the best about Liverpool as an outsider who came to live in the city is the fact that you'll never see a Sun newspaper on any of the shelves, or it's very, very rare. And there's usually some people protesting outside if they do. And I think that shows in the mentality of the people that, you know, if we're not reading good to press, then, you know, the people get a better education in what's actually going on in the country. So, and you were involved in that quite, you know, from the start, if I understand it correctly.
There's various groups who have, over the last many years, have done like amazing work concerning the Sun newspaper. I, as a shop, decided to sell newspapers about 7 maybe years ago. I don't know the exact date. And at the time, there were the newspaper organisations. WH Smiths was sending bundles of newspapers to you with the Sun in. I was at Hillsborough myself. I didn't feel comfortable about it, but it was like a package. They were sort of bullying you to take all of them. So I didn't feel comfortable with it. We used to put them under the counter, send them back the same night, unsold. And this went on for about the first 3 weeks. Then I said, I didn't like it. So I phoned them up, very scared, very nervously, saying, look, this is my situation. I'm not comfortable with this. And they said, okay, you don't have to sell it, which was very surprising to me. So we then, with a few other friends, encouraged and asked other shopkeepers, maybe, is it the right things you should be doing? And it sort of snowballed across the city, and luckily, with the help of many other people, and basically it was the people power. The people in the city didn't want the newspaper in the city, but as shopkeepers we were thought we had to sell them, basically. And when that myth was taken away, it was very easy then for the shopkeepers to phone the suppliers and say, I don't want to sell it. And the past people power then was saying you shouldn't have it in the shops, which resulted in yeah, basically it being wiped out the city now. So it was very, very many different groups doing that, and very many people doing that. So it was a massive collective movement by the city to get it out of the city, really.
Fantastic. Well, it's all examples of why I love living here, really. So, Brent, you live in the East Midlands. You're the odd one out tonight. East Midlands, you know, was an area that the Labour Party suffered in a bit during the last election, and where the right's made some inroads. But what difference would it make, do you think, if you know, Derby or Nottingham, for example, were to say you know, we're not going to sell the Sun anymore?
Well, I mean, I remember I was about 7 or 8 years old, and my mother used to get the Sun for the bingo. And it tells you how impressionable I was as a kid. I was watching Spitting Image when I was about 5. But I remember my dad pointing out one of the cartoons in it. It was very anti-Irish and sectarian. So that was the end of the Sun in our house, and that was the mid-80s. So it was always banned in our house, and certainly banned in parts of Ireland as well, and other parts of the UK. Nottingham and Derby, the East Midlands is a very interesting area. It has been deindustrialised. You've got the old mining areas, and you've got the two cities that seem to do quite well, quite cosmopolitan. But when you go into the old mining areas on the outskirts of both of the cities, you start to see abject poverty. Nottingham's got some of the highest rates of inner city poverty. The gap between the rich and the poor is massive, especially in Nottingham City. You've got the affluent south, and you've got the very unaffluent north. And it's the same when it comes to development. And sadly, you know, as a working class areas, they did falls, I suppose, for the whole Brexit thing and Boris thing and the populism of Boris. And there's a bit of friends of mine who are, you know, ex-Labour who unpalatably didn't go with Jeremy Corbyn just on that doorstep. And I was out on the doorsteps myself. And I had, you know, people who just didn't like. And previous to that, there was an issue about the rumor that was spread about Red Ed and the whole Nicola Sturgeon thing, and they were doing a lot of tying in of, you know, the coalition of chaos in 2015. So that they've been hitting this sort of populism in East Midlands. And Farage, he's been up quite a lot of times in Nottingham, and it's quite a rebellious area. I mean, it's always been quite you know, its own place. I mean, if you think back to its reputation from the Nottingham riots in the 1830s, it's always been quite a little rebellious place. But certainly you do have some traditional working class voters who stayed at home. I don't think, it's not that many switched. I think this analysis that people switched from red to blue is wrong. I think what happened is that in our area, you had no more UKIP standing, and that would have split the right-wing vote, and the Tory vote got a little tiny bit of red, just a little tiny bit, but with no UKIP standing. And I knew that analysis when I saw there was no counterfoil to divide the right-wing vote. And that's really what cost in the East Midlands, was the fact that UKIP stood down and the Tories had a free run of it. And a bit like in 2000 and the American election with Hillary Clinton, it's not that Trump won that election, it's the fact that the core support for Hillary decided, you know what, they'd stay at home. And that was my analysis from the very start. It was that the Labour vote wasn't going to hold up for multiple reasons. Brexit, again, I think some issues with Jeremy Corbyn and the right-wing media, which does come back to the Sun, the Mail, and their dog whistling and all of that. And you know, I spoke to Ian Lavery, we spoke before with Ian about the work he's been doing about trying to understand why certain people have voted that way. And the messaging was quite simple: get Brexit done. I mean, you could have put Coco with a clown in a blue suit in my area. And in fact, one of the worst examples is the MP for Broxtowe. The guy was parachuted in, and I debated him in Broxtowe against Anna Sudbury, which was hilarious because we all had a free vote, and I was a Green, and we had the Greg Marshall, who was the Labour candidate, who was an exceptional candidate, by the way. He was absolutely, would have made a cracking MP. They've missed out in Broxtowe, because and I can put aside my party allegiances as a Green, he would have made an absolute cracking MP. But all he had to do was just put somebody in a blue suit in that area, and he increased the majority. And he turned around on the day he debated me on another debate and said about people need to budget better in food banks. And that made national news. And he still got elected. And that was tragic, because that's what people have elected. They have elected not a person who's ever going to vote against. And we have that in both Erewash and Broxtowe and some of our East Midlands constituencies like Pauline Latham's and all the rest of them. They never vote against their party. They will do what they're told. They're obedient. And I come to the conclusion that they chose their candidates and purged the Conservative Party of the 25, 30 kind of like Sudburys, for instance. And what they've done is replace them with drones. And it is shocking, because they, the ones that just went ahead with child poverty and went, what way do you want me to vote? That way. And they don't question it. And that's, for me, there's a democratic deficit. And we need to wake areas of the likes of the East Midlands up to the fact that, unfortunately, the people that they've elected don't know them, don't understand them, don't care about them, and just, it's, you know, it's, and you can, the problem with that is you can tell people that, but they have to come to the self-actualization themselves, and they're going to have to, and what Alan was saying about the education part and what Ian was saying about empowering people, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to educate people, not patronize them, but say to them, look, you had a choice here. You chose to send this person down to Parliament. This is what they've done for you. This is what they've done for their party. And this is what they've done for Boris. And many, unfortunately, we're just seeing the election as a popularity contest, like some sort of like the game of Trump, you know, that was like, I voted for Boris. No, you didn't. You vote for that person in your constituency that you've represent you. And it's interesting the amount of people complaining now about what their MP hasn't done for them during COVID. And you go, well, this is what you chose. And it's frustrating, but at the same time, you've got to understand where people are coming from and how fatigued they were in the election and how they just went for the simplest message. And the simplest message obviously was marketed by the likes of the Commons was just get Brexit done, get Brexit done, get Brexit. And they kept it very simple. And it's sad that they've boiled politics down to almost the polls. And it really, really upsets me when you hear, you know, and I look at, you know, where Keir Starmer's doing things at the moment, and it's all about the polls, and you think, that's not what it should be about. It shouldn't be about doing something just because it's going to be popular.
And it's not working. Ian, we departed from the topic of the schools there in your constituency to talk about some other things, but let's come back to that briefly. And then I want to look at the British gas situation, which again, I know you have a personal connection to as well. So what are you hearing back from the schools and from the families in your constituency, mate?
Probably very much what Brent's talking about. I think the analogy is absolutely spot on. I think COVID just shone a light on the inequality in society, and it's, you know, I asked Johnson a question in PMQs, or it was education question, I can't remember, but he said, you know, how many people in Eton haven't got access to the laptop and broadband? And I think that's really that's the right angle we should be going, because what we're getting on the ground from the teachers is obviously, you know, you could have one family with one laptop who are all trying to get on and do their various remote learning, and you know, instead of, I think the great shame here is that we had the first lockdown and we knew what was going to be coming, and there was no preparation, there was no dialogue with the NEU who had it mapped out of how we could have improved the whole offering, from remote learning aspect. They could have done that. They could have prepared, because we knew we were going to get a second wave. You know, it was always going to be on the cards, you know, and the way they've handled it enabled the second wave. You know, there was no zero COVID, preparation. It was, so we knew it was going to be coming, and they did absolutely nothing, to enable schools to have the facility to do remote learning, which was equal across the board. And I think what always sticks in my mind, Steve, is that we had I had a surgery, and I had a teacher from West Derby who was working in a private school in Chester. And he said, obviously there's been an impact, but minimal impact. He said, what I'm seeing actually within the state school sector and what's happening in West Derby, we're seeing, like, you know, the impact of what's actually happening with the schools, the starvation of funds. The whole way Williamson's handled it has been, you know, catastrophic for our communities and our children. So very much, as Brent said, you know, education's one aspect of the failings of the response and how it's hit people in our communities, the artists and the working class, you know, and I think that's something which is there. The evidence is there, and it's heartbreaking. I think about 2 weeks ago now, we had a meeting with a couple of ministers, and we had the head teachers from West Derby, you know, asking questions from all sectors, from the nurseries which hadn't shut, from the SEND schools, which hadn't shut, you know, and there were so many issues around what was actually happening, and the responses they got, they said there was a dialogue there, but there was nothing really of substance, and I think our meeting just reflected the government policy really, and where we are now as well. It's heartbreaking, to be honest, and I think I'd be interested in what Brent thinks about this, but I think, you know, it's shown the possibilities for remote learning if done correctly, you know, and, you know, what we can do as a society post-COVID, you know, the opportunities like Zoom, for instance, is, you know, it's transformed many aspects of where we are, some positive. But, you know, I think the whole focus of the government's response has just been to keep schools open at any costs, and no thought to actually how we deal with what was actually happening. And speaking to a couple of teachers from West Derby, obviously now we're in a position where some of them have got 50% attendance. They've still got to cater remotely. The pressure on them's absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, the head teachers have been unbelievable, certainly in West Derby.
Some bad outbreaks as well in one of the schools, at least one of the schools in your area.
Absolutely, Steve. No, they've been absolutely immense. And, you know, just to finish, I think what this has actually shown is the importance of schools, but actually what they do. The education aspect's one aspect to it. They're actually underpinning many of our communities now, and it's shown when they're shut. And you know what actually, you know, what they actually do for our communities. So, like many things post COVID, hopefully there'll be revision, and people will understand how important frontline public sector workers are to our communities and what they actually bring, and hopefully there'll be more of a positive outlook. But then I read Andrew Neil's tweet today about the NEU, which was absolutely despicable.
Well, that's the thing, is that the people appreciate what the frontline workers are doing, and then we've got the media again tying us back into what we were just talking about, demonising the teachers at the minute, trying to force the schools to open again, and shame teachers for wanting to protect themselves and the kids that they teach and their own families, etc. as well, for, you know, in the middle of the government creating an absolute horror in the pandemic.
No, absolutely. So for me, I think from an education aspect, you know, they've been totally underprepared. They haven't done what was required for our communities. They haven't learnt any lessons, and I think the lack of dialogue with the trade unions has just been beyond belief. And that's continued, hasn't it, from right through. I mean, I think Brent said he was a trade union. That'd be interesting, you know, just a lack of actual dialogue with them and interaction and learning from them. And, you know, we could have been in a far better place if lessons had been learnt early, and then we could have adapted and you know, and made it a response. Which was
Brent, last week we saw Boris Johnson give Gavin Williamson a pat on the back for his job so far. As a teacher and a union rep, what was your reaction to that?
Well, you know, you were there, Steve, when you broke the news about the schools closing, and it was look, the thing about it is
it's a very emotional moment.
It was. My union have played a blinder, and they haven't been militant. They've been for some people, they've been quite reserved, and for others, they've been not pushing far enough. You know, so it's hard to be what they've done, but they have been right all the way through. They were right about track and trace. They were right about the funding. Two things that's really upset me about the whole lot is trying to guilt me into going back to school. And it's the way that they've used, like, the human shield. It's almost like Saddam Hussein. I was teaching about Saddam Hussein the other day, and he put kids in front of the front line to the Allies and says, you want to bomb me, pull these kids up. To use children as a guilt trip to try and force us back into schools, as if we really need that. I go into schools even though I know the risk, because I service my community. I care about my community. I was asked a question today on radio, you know, if I had the vaccine, and Tony Blair came out and says, vaccinate the teachers. I would happily give my vaccine up for my midday supervisor. I would happily give it up, who's in her late 60s, who works 3 jobs. I would happily give it up for any of my education professionals who are more vulnerable than me. And I would happily give it up to some children who I know I teach, who are medically unsound to go into school. I would happily give up my vaccine for those people. And for have this government try and vilify teachers and teacher bash, it's been dog whistling and it's been upsetting. And then the second thing is, the whole union thing about, we're just militant lefties and the Daily Mail and all the rest of it. And to have, Keir Starmer do a Daily Mail today was insulting. It really was. And we don't need him putting pressure on, and we need him to be supportive of us, and he hasn't been. Kate Green showed up the other day at the NEU Mirror, big announcement, and it went down like a lead balloon because it was like, where have you been? And individual Labour MPs have been absolutely fantastic, do not get me wrong, and the grassroots has been absolutely fantastic, do not get me wrong, but we've felt as a profession very exposed, and we felt as a profession a little bit vulnerable. And I'm doing the amount of times I've rung international radio to defend my profession against the storm of right-wing press, and it's disgusting. It's nurses don't get treated like this. And I have a simple thing about it. I mean, I'm trying to oppose the likes of high-speed rail at the moment, and I have been for 10 years because I've been wasting billions on things like that, and it should be going towards things we need. And for me, you've had thousands of workers out doing stuff like chopping trees down. What they should have been doing from March is building us better classrooms. For me, they should have been building us better classrooms that we could have build back better. And I've been saying this. They want to build back better, build us better education, build us better schools. Therefore, we'll have a legacy that will bring our children into the future. I am sick of seeing schools that my colleagues work in that have more leaks than the Titanic. I mean, it's disgusting, the state of some of our schools, because what has happened to them, these educational trusts, who, funny enough, this is what the government goes to when they say schools want to go back. They always go to these CEOs on 5-figure sums of big educational trusts, because in essence, education has been semi-privatized, clandestine privatization through the back door with academies and academy trusts. I've got academy trusts close to me. We've got no union representation, but the head teacher comes in like basically Adolf Hitler and sacks a third of the staff like that. We're not public sector any longer in education. We are not. We saw that with Gavin Williamson was threatening Ofsted to say how good remote learning was. And we're like, so what did parents do? He got 5,000 phone calls saying teachers are doing a brilliant job, and I was proud of that. As regards the opportunities, absolutely, and there are some fantastic opportunities. We've had to reskill in a week. I had to reskill to do this type of thing in a week. And my first ever Teams lesson with kids, I swear, it's like that scene from Jerry Maguire when he holds up the goldfish and he goes, "Who's with me? Is there anybody there?" And I was ranting at the kids for 5 minutes going, "Why aren't you answering me back?" Until I realized I was on mute. And the amount of stuff, I realized another one I did the other day, and there's some hilarious stuff you can do. It's like I've got Alexa in my living room, so I was doing my lessons at home because my daughter was pinged at nursery. So I had a 2-year-old sitting in an iPad beside me, class full of 30 children, funny enough, learning about the Iraq and Saddam Hussein. And I turned around and I got frustrated that I was getting very little back from them. So I just shouted to my Alexa, "Alexa, who's Saddam Hussein?" And all the kids' Alexas started pinging and some of their phones started So I realized that's what I do from now on. If they're annoying me, I start shouting, "Alexa," and if some random question, "Who's Prince Rupert of the Rhine?" And the parents, they're doing work and they go, "Why is the Alexa got off?" Sir's just set the Alexa off, you know. And
so let's just switch direction for the last 5 minutes then, and Ian, give us a very quick rundown, because we had somebody on from the GMB on the program the other week and talking about the fire and rehire stuff, and while we've got people like Alan and we've got the teachers on the front line, are all doing the best to try to make things better during a crisis. We've got some big corporations trying to exploit the situation to improve their profits and drive down their costs. Tell us a bit about hire and refire with the GMB at British Gasman.
I think, well, it's 11 days. I'm married, being on the picket lines. My brother's actually a GMB rep in the Northwest, so you can, he tells me, and we've had Zoom calls with GMB reps and members, and saying what it entails and what it would entail. And I think the GMB are obviously fighting their battle against British Gas, but I think this is a battle for the whole movement, Steve, because fire me eye, we've seen it with British Airways, we've seen it with bus depots in Manchester. It's endemic at the moment. It's across whole of industries, and I think if it's allowed to carry on, it's just going to drive so many people into what Brent was talking about before. The inequalities will just worsen. You know, when you're actually seeing people get up to 30% of the wages taken off them, what do the companies think that's what's going to happen to the, you know, people who are living, you know, at the moment, people are living really on the line, you know, when it only takes a drop in income and then you're into your food banks, you're into your food pantries, you know, you're losing your mortgage. And I just think the whole premise of firing higher is so pernicious, so wicked. You know,
we saw a big victory for the unions last week on that front as well, with the British cargo
workers,
with Unite. So I mean, what can people who want to support the British gas workers do? How can they help to win that fight?
I think the solidarity, what have you actually been getting, Steve's been magnificent, you know, and I think I've just seen certainly in Liverpool, the community have come out. You know, people are complaining to British Gas about the service now, and you know, these are frontline workers, and that was a blue chip company which we're all extremely proud of, much like British Airways when it was nationalised, when it was publicly owned. So, you know, for me, it's a battle which the trade union movement have been fantastic in taking on. All unions are really coming together, and you only have to see the power of the whole movement when it comes together. When they were talking about renegotiating the employment rights, Steve, and they've had to back down extremely quickly in the face of a united front, you know, from both political and trade union, and people just saying no, it's not acceptable. And we need more of that. You know, we need more of complete unity, showing that, you know, when the movement does flex its muscles and people see what's right and what is immoral, well, then there's a fight back. And these fights, British Gas, British Airways, you know, what's happening now, they've got to be won. Because if they're not won and these are left, these contracts are enabled, and we're going to see what we're going to see, but then, you know, it's really worrying times for the country. And I think people of all different political views now are looking at this and saying it's immoral, it can't go on. And just to finish, I don't know if you've seen The Guardian today. I know The Guardian's much maligned, but Roy Attersley done a column in it today, and it's worth reading, and it surprised me what he was actually saying within it. And I think it's exactly what Brent was talking about. You know, if we're not going to fight the inequalities, which right to food's a part of what we're trying to do, systemic change, if we're not going to tackle inequalities, if we're not going to fight to reduce what's actually happening in this country, because it's gone back 100 years, but then what are we in this for? And I think that's really important. It's a really important message. So for me, I've got a bit of fire in my eye, but Steve, it all feeds in to where we are. It's inequality, and companies are trying to take advantage to make that inequality worse, and we've got to stop them.
I think, you know, we've run into the end of our time now, but I think the messages are, you know, there's a thread running through all this, really.
Absolutely.
You know, we've got solidarity in communities. We've got solidarity in unions. If you're not in a union, join one. We've got solidarity with the workers. We've got, you know, if you've got a teacher in your family, or, you know, you see in schools, your kids' teachers, give them your support, your solidarity. Support your local businesses. Especially the ones that are doing their best to help the community around them as well. And if you happen to live in South Liverpool area, or be driving down Egworth Road and you're hungry, make sure you pop in the bread shop for your butty or your pie, and help a local business there. Drop a fiver in the food bank kitty while you're there as well. Thanks a lot, fellas. Really appreciate your time.